let's jump into it. Let's talk about the University of Washington Huskies. They finished the season ranked 11th in the country. Not bad for the Dogs. They will go ahead and head to the Fiesta Bowl, where they will face the number 9 ranked team, Penn State. Against Penn State, the Huskies will face the nation's most touted running back in Saquon Barkley, who rushed for 1,134 yards and 16 touchdowns. The matchup is kind of perfect because defensively, the Huskies enter the game with the number 1 rushing defense, allowing just 92.3 yards per game and 2.63 rush yards per play. Should be an interesting matchup. I kind of like that it's different. It's going to be kind of eye-opening for both coasts, really. I mean, You've heard a lot of hype about Penn State and Saquon Barkley, but now for those of us here on the West Coast, and specifically Washington State, we're going to get a chance to see what the hype is really all about. And for people on the East Coast, they're going to get, a chance to see maybe what Chris Peterson was crying about, his team not getting enough recognition and things like that. Seth, what are your thoughts about the Fiesta Bowl?
I think it might be a little bit of a grudge match going back to last year. The Huskies were the number 4 team in the college football playoff a year ago, and I believe Penn State was number 5, so they were just out of the rankings. So
I didn't even link those two things together, yeah.
I think it'll absolutely be a grudge match, especially for Penn State. So it should be exciting to see, as you mentioned, the great running game of Penn State and the country-leading Huskies run defense. The Huskies did have a little trouble stopping the run against elite running backs like, what was his name,
Bryce Love from Stanford, yeah.
So I'm a little concerned going up against who's going to be an early first-round pick in Barkley. We'll see how it plays out, I suppose, on the 30th that they play?
I don't know if it's a New Year's Day game or not. I'm not 100% sure on that, but do you think these numbers are a little misleading with the Huskies having the number 1 rush defense in the country? We've talked about it all year long, how they weren't necessarily tested, or they shouldn't have been tested until that Stanford game. We know they lost that Arizona State game early in the year, but their first true test came against Stanford, and they dropped that game. You already mentioned Bryce Love. Do you think these numbers are misleading to an extent for the Huskies defense?
Yeah, to an extent, probably, because they didn't really play any difficult teams until Stanford. They didn't even have to play USC this year. Their first 3 games of the year were against like Rutgers, Idaho, Montana State. It was very, very subpar teams. So their stats, to an extent, are going to be inflated. They looked very, very beatable in the Stanford game, of course. They ended up losing that game, and the run defense got worse as the game went along.
Yeah, and I mean, it's tough because we kind of have seen the entire Huskies season. We don't know, what it was like for Penn State if they had tough. They might have had tough opponents in name. Both teams are going to enter the game with a 10-2 record, but it's very interesting to me. Going to look up some season. Myles Gaskin. We talked about the running game for Penn State. Gaskin, I believe, has more yards this year. I'm going to try and get the exact number. Gaskin has more yards
than Barkley?
Yeah, let me look it up.
I know Barkley is, in the latest NFL projections, I believe he was in the top 5 for overall prospects. So that should definitely be a interesting matchup to watch as that develops through the game, to see if they're really able to contain him or if he's just going to break off a couple big plays and really change the shape of the game that way.
Yeah, Gaskin on 208 attempts has 1,322 rushing yards for a net gain, actually, of 1,282 and 19 touchdowns. So a little bit more production than Barkley, but like we said earlier, don't put as much stock in it maybe necessarily as other stats, I guess, because of the inflated schedule that the Huskies did play this year. Do you think they have an advantage in the passing game? I mean, we usually have a guy in here telling us that a 10-2 quarterback isn't good enough and won't get the job done in this, that, and the other. But do you think they have an advantage in the passing game, or do you think it's pretty even there?
I'm not all that familiar with Penn State's quarterback. Looking at his stats, he looked to be on par with Jake Browning, so I don't think there's necessarily a huge advantage one way or the other. I know their offense as a whole averages 453 yards per game, which that's pretty good, but and they also don't turn the ball over very often. They had less than 1 turnover per game.
That was Penn State?
Yes. So I don't think that the Huskies are going to win this game by Penn State mistakes. They're going to have to go out. They're going to have to put up some points, I think, because I do believe that Penn State's offense will at some point poke through the defense for a couple scores.
See, and maybe now looking through the receiving stats for the year for the University of Washington Huskies, this could be a reason why. You know what? For me, it is a reason why that they're not. They didn't finish higher in the rankings in the regular season. Dante Pettis, everyone knew about him though coming into this year. He had 721 yards on the season. The next closest receiver only played 8 games. It was Hunter Bryant. He only had 331 yards receiving this season.
So he had more than twice as much as the next guy.
There's just one guy to pass to in this game, and that's what it's more about. It's more about the weapons around Jake Browning than it is Jake Browning. Jake Browning didn't get worse from one year to the next.
Yeah.
And it's really why the Huskies didn't have, an explosive offense like they had maybe a year ago. It was just something was missing in the passing game, and that's really why we're sitting here talking about a Fiesta Bowl instead of maybe a college playoff berth. I'm not going to say that they were that quality of team this year, but they were close if they win that Arizona State game.
Yeah. I don't know that they would get in at 11-1, but you're right. I mean, especially with John Ross, who was, the number 9 overall pick in this last year's NFL draft. He set the record for the 40-yard dash time. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, when you take away a deep threat guy and really an all-around receiver like that, that's going to change how your offense functions. You're not going to be able to stretch the field the same way that you were.
Yeah, it's been an interesting year for the Washington Huskies. It's been fun to watch, a little frustrating at times, especially like we said with that Arizona State loss early in the year. Kind of ruined their college football playoff hopes. And we'll see what they do in the Fiesta Bowl. I'm excited. Like you said, Seth and I both aren't very familiar with Penn State, but we're going to get a chance to see them and kind of learn more about this team as that game happens. I think I'm excited for it. Like you said, it's not as climactic as last year playing Alabama in the college football playoffs. Like, that was sweet. But, this year, a little different, and that's okay.